Hi guys, got a quick unboxing video for you here. It's a Kingston Hyper X solid state drive, a 120GB variation of it. I wanted to highlight it because for the price this is actually quite a quick solid state drive. We've got a 555MB read and a 510MB per second write speed. For a drive at this price point, that's very good. So let's have a quick gander at what we get with it. Manual, obviously, and we get a lovely little hologram sticker. Put on, if I can get that in focus. You make sure all your friends know you've got a Kingston Hyper X inside. I do really like the box in this. I know it's a bit chunky for a solid state drive, but it looks really nice. I think the drive sits really well in it. So let's see if I can get out of these on. See, a lot of solid state drives got quite understated styling. This has got sort of a gunmetal on the back, brushed aluminium, and sort of a ridged chromed effect lettering. You might not be able to see the texturing of that on the video, but it's a very nice drive. Obviously, more importantly, later we'll get into the benchmarks, but it's a very nice drive. Again, very nice packaging. We've got this X in the foam. I hesitated when I first opened this because I expected there to be a caddy with it, but it's hidden very nicely underneath. So the caddy is sitting in the back of the foam. And the caddy also hides the screws to mount the hard drive into the caddy and the screws to mount the caddy into the case. Very nice piece of kit, very well packaged. Really love this. Most importantly, we'll get some benchmarks, and I'll include some screenshots of those in the video in a second. But I just wanted to highlight the packaging and the styling of this because it is very nicely packaged. It does look very nice. I mean, I love the sort of electric blue aluminium of the caddy. I mean, if you're going to be mounting this in a case where you're going to be able to see it, which this most likely is, then stuff like this is a really nice touch, and this is a particularly nice one. I mean, I've had some from Corsair and OCZ, but I just prefer the look of this much more. This is much more flashy. So without further ado, we'll get on to some benchmarks. Okay, so for the benchmarks, I've left the speed and accuracy on the default settings. We'll start off with the small block size test. The first test is a 512 bytes block size. As is to be expected when using a small block size, we've got much lower transfer rates. Every hard drive gets lower transfer rates when showing small block sizes. What's really important with a solid state drive like this is really your burst rate and access time. As you'll see, we've got quite a respectable burst rate. The hard drive is over 500 megabits read and write. To get about half that when you're using such a small block size is pretty good. No complaints about this. What I do find very odd, and you'll see this from all of the tests, is that the first 30% or so of the drive performs completely differently from the rest of the drive. After the sort of 33% mark, the consistency in the performance of this drive is pretty good. But before that point, it wanders quite considerably. Now I'm going to open this up to Kingston and send it to them and ask them to explain why. I'm sure we can find. I'm sure you'll be able to find some more technical reviews of this. But I just wanted to give an overview of the drive. I didn't want to go into too much detail. But I will, if I find any details, I will post them in the description. And before anybody flags up the CPU usage of this being -1%, that's clearly an error. This drive is not going to make your CPU faster. Don't quite know what causes that. I think it's something to do with the access times being that good. It just struggles to calculate it. But basically you can take that as a CPU usage being negligible. with the CPU this is being used on, which is on an AM3 system. I forget exactly what CPU. The CPU usage is negligible. It's barely measurable. That's the point with the -1. Okay, so moving on to the second test here. This is using the HD Tune default settings. It's a 64 kilobyte block size. As you can see, burst rate's pretty similar. It's down a little bit, but it's about the same. Access time's pretty much the same. CPU usage is the same. We're still immeasurably small. We are starting to see a decent improvement in transfer rates now. Again, we've got this sort of below the 30% mark. We've got some much more inconsistency in the performance of the drive. They say at one point it dropped down to 150 megabytes per second, which is really weird. After this sort of 33% mark, even though we are still wandering in the performance a bit, we are relatively stable around the 360 megabits mark, which is odd. I mean, it's a shame that this drive has such a dramatic dip at the bottom. I mean, it affects its average scores quite dramatically. It's not really you can't really rely on the average scores for this drive, because for the most part of the drive it's scoring much higher than its average. Okay, so moving on to HD Tune's highest block size of 8 megabytes, we'll start to really see what sort of transfer rates this drive can achieve. Now, again, we've got CPU usage, burst rate, and access time are all about the same. Again, we see that in the first 30% of the drive, we've got some real massive inconsistencies in the performance, but after that point, we're very, very consistent, and we're running consistently above the 500 megabytes per second point. Now, the drive is advertised at getting close to 550, but let's face it, we all know that the lab benchmarks they do to put the advertising sticker on are always going to be in favour of the drive. They're going to experiment with dozens and dozens of tests to get the absolute best performance they can to stick on the advertising sticker, which is kind of why I do the default settings. I do the smallest block size and the largest block size, because I don't really care about finding the absolute best of a drive and finding the absolute worst. I just want to give a broad spectrum of how it performs. So if we find any extremes in this, then we know it's a bad drive. If we find it's fairly consistent, we know it's a good drive. We could spend ages going into detail, but at the end of the day, how a drive performs under some very specific conditions is not relevant. This drive is getting above 500 megabytes per second fairly consistently. It rarely drops below 450. You know, it's a decent drive. I mean, I've done some tests on the Corsair and OCZ equivalents. I found the OCZ's performance to be more stable. Both the OCZ and the Corsair got more stable performance than this Kingston drive did. However, this Kingston drive is about 30% cheaper than the OCZ and Corsair equivalents. Now, I expect that to change very soon. Obviously, Corsair and OCZ are going to have to respond to that, because this drive it's a hair off being as good as the Corsair and OCZ, and it's significantly cheaper. To be honest, my money would be on this drive as it is now. I generally tend to favour Corsair stuff, but as of today, my money would be on this drive. Now, if Corsair and OCZ bring their prices down to match the Kingston, then I'll go with the Corsair or the OCZ. But as it stands today, this would be one of my hard drives of choice. I mean, to get a solid state drive this cheap and this fast is absolutely phenomenal. Total absolute 10 out of 10 for value for money for this drive, and it performs well too. No complaints here. I mean, if you can make do with 120 gigabyte hard drive, this is a very good buy. I recommend anybody who's looking for a solid state drive and you can manage with 120 gigabytes, get one of these. Assuming the video is not now about 3 years old, of course. So guys, if you've got any questions, write your questions in the comments. I'd appreciate the like on the video if you found this useful. If you want to see more stuff like this, subscribe to my channel, and just have a great day. See you soon.